If you like storytime vibes, hit subscribe and let's dive in together.
Relax, he's just a coworker, Riley whispered. But at 2 a.m., he saw Joseph's car in his driveway. He blocked it in, marched to the door, and knocked hard. When it opened, Malene stood there, robe loose, eyes wide. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered. Then Joseph appeared, shirtless, barefoot, glaring as if he were the intruder. And in that moment, his world shattered. Everything began with a knock, a lie, and a betrayal. What followed shattered love, trust, and everything he once believed was real. And tonight, this is the story of Aiden. Aiden is a man grounded in practicality. Someone who places absolute trust in love and the promise of marriage. Riley is the fiancé he's entrusted his future to, the one he believed would build a steady life with him. But that very trust is what ends up being tested in the harshest way. After weeks of endless overtime shifts and skipped dinners, Aiden came home one night running on nothing but sheer exhaustion. All he wanted was the quiet of his own bed. But as he turned onto their street, that hope shattered. Parked in his driveway, in the space where his car should have been, sat a silver sedan. His stomach sank even before his brain caught up. Joseph, the colleague Riley always brushed off with a laugh whenever Aiden asked. "Relax," she had once whispered, almost amused. "He's just a coworker." But at 2 in the morning, with Joseph's car in his driveway, that excuse rang hollow. Aiden eased his car in behind Joseph's, bumper almost touching bumper, deliberate. He killed the engine, but left the lights beaming into the house like a searchlight. Some part of him was methodical then, calm where he might have expected to be shaking. He climbed the porch steps with a rhythm to his knocks that wouldn't let the night pretend nothing was wrong. The house answered with silence for a long beat. Then the deadbolt scraped. The door opened a crack. Riley stood framed in the doorway, robe half-tied, hair a mess, eyes wide, astonishment leaking into fear. She started to say something rehearsed, but it melted on her tongue when she saw the expression on his face. Behind her, Joseph moved into view, shirtless, barefoot, as if someone had walked out of a bar and into the wrong life. Joseph's face carried the faint look of annoyance, as if Aiden were the one who should be embarrassed. That was arrogance. Aiden stepped past Riley into the living room, watching how Joseph straightened, how he glanced at Riley like she might supply the line. "It's late," Joseph said, voice the wrong kind of casual. "What's late is your taste in timing," Aiden replied. He tried to keep his voice even. It wasn't anger that moved him so much as a slow, blazing disappointment. Riley began the old script. It wasn't what it looked like. Joseph had had too much to drink. She didn't want him driving. The room smelled of wine and a cologne Aiden didn't own. A jacket, Joseph's, hung over an armchair. His wallet and keys sat on the coffee table. 2 wine glasses, 1 half-empty bottle. No, Aiden thought. That's not a random Good Samaritan situation. He moved to the table, picked up the wallet before Joseph could think to reach for it. Joseph took a step. "Give it back," he snapped. Aiden opened it. Receipts, restaurant names and liquor stores, dates, and 1 folded receipt from a rental office with a key card tucked into a paper sleeve. Aiden held it up and watched Riley's color drain. Joseph cursed and lunged for it, but Aiden was faster. He slipped the wallet into his own pocket. "You have some nerve showing up at my house," Aiden said. He didn't shout. He let the quiet be sharp and heavy. The neighborhood had begun to stir. Lights across the street coming on, a dog barking. Aiden didn't care who watched. He wanted names, dates, explanations. He wanted truth. How long? He pointed at them both. How long has this been going on? Riley's eyes darted around like a trapped animal, looking for an escape she could pretend to take. Joseph sneered and answered with careless cruelty. Long enough. Hearing it aloud was like a blow. Riley's confession came in pieces, a rehearsed pattern of rationalization. She never meant to hurt him the way it felt to be hurt. But when she finally admitted they'd been meeting at a condo across town, the house fell away. It wasn't a fling. It was logistical, organized. The key card in the wallet, the rental receipt. This had been thought out. Aiden didn't hit or shout. He let silence do the work. Then, with the same quiet precision he'd used to pin Joseph in the driveway, he turned and pointed to the street. Get out. Joseph hesitated for a calculating second, measuring the risk. The sight of Aiden's car behind his pushed him to a decision. He grabbed his jacket and marched out. Riley followed, voice loud and pleading. Aiden did not listen. The door slammed. He sat in the armchair with Joseph's wallet in his hand, the paper keycard feeling like the first thread of a web he hadn't known existed. Sleep evaporated. The adrenaline wouldn't let him rest. He sat until dawn, staring at the keycard sleeve the way you stare at a wound until you've memorized its contours. At sunrise, he went to work, like a man performing an inevitable task. But his mind wasn't at the office. Every spare moment he had was taken up cataloging receipts, tracing patterns. There it was, the same liquor store on Thursdays, the restaurant on Saturdays, and across 3 pages of transaction slips, one line that named a rental office, an address. He drove to that address after work. A mid-tier condo complex that pretended to be upscale with faux stone facades and a flashy gate with a broken buzzer. He parked across the street and watched until they pulled in, coordinated, Joseph with a bottle of wine and groceries, Riley slipping into the passenger seat like a woman walking into a second marriage. Watching them move through the gate together made something cold and focused click inside Aiden. This wasn't a couple scheming a late-night hookup. This was a private life built in mirrors, a parallel of deceit. He could have called law enforcement then. He could have confronted Joseph in the parking lot. But instead he did something slower, smarter. He dug out an old contact, Luke Reed, a childhood friend gone into financial crimes. Reed listened, then stopped breathing like men do when someone hands them a clue that might close a long, complicated loop. Aiden, Reed said quietly. Keller, Joseph Keller? We've had our eyes on him. Suspicion of embezzlement, funneling funds, shell accounts. Nothing we could pin solidly, not enough paper. If you have receipts, key cards, anything, hold. Don't confront them again. Let us move carefully. It was the first time Aiden realized this might be more than a domestic pain. The key card and the receipts looked random until you saw them as patterns, as evidence. Aiden's anger slid into a thin, dangerous determination. This wasn't simply about being cheated on. If Joseph's criminal activity began to be exposed, Aiden's name, tied through forged papers and transfers, could be pulled into a legal tangle. So he played parts. He would not be the man who stormed into rooms. Instead, he became the actor who pretends the wound is healing. At home, he kept his voice light, asked about dinner plans, hugged Riley goodbye with the hollow warmth of a man learning how to breathe shallow around someone he once trusted. Behind closed doors, he turned Luke. He started collecting, not just the wallet and the key card, every little thing that could be useful. He photographed receipts and hidden papers, copied down account numbers found in Riley's wallet, and searched shared laptops for emails he could legitimately access. On a night when she thought he was asleep, he found a small envelope in her dresser. Rental payments, wine deliveries, utility statements for the condo, some bearing his signature, his name forged in her neat hand. The blood drained from his face. Riley hadn't merely been keeping a lover, she'd been constructing a paper trail that could frame him. Payments in his name. Signatures that would put him on the hook if someone decided to tie the missing funds back to an outside spender. Aiden laughed once, a short, useless sound at the absurdity. She had been careless, she had been arrogant. She had thought she could hold 2 lives and keep one of them secret. Luke Reed met Aiden in a diner with the kind of privacy you find in cheap booths at 2 in the afternoon. Reed was blunt and efficient, the way good investigators have to be. He took the photos Aiden slid across the table and whistled low. "These could move things," Reed said, "but be careful. If they know you're feeding us, you're at risk. If they suspect you're the one collecting evidence, they will try to disappear or worse." Aiden's reply was short. Fear had burned out of him. What scared him more was the idea of waking up in a courtroom, explaining how he'd missed the signs. He tightened his jaw. He would not be the man who was played. He would be the man who played back, on his own terms. The weeks that followed felt like controlled theater pieces. Aiden played the forgiving fiancé, the supportive partner, the man who had resolved his jealousy. He complimented Riley while his phone's camera gathered proof. When she left for late meetings, he followed at a distance until she pulled into the condo, until he watched from the shade as Joseph handed her a folder thick with paper. Joseph's hand trembled as he passed it to her. She signed without looking up. Aiden took photos through the slit in the curtains. He made copies, cataloged dates, highlighted names and transfers. He found bank withdrawals that matched the pattern of the receipts. Small at first, then ballooning into sums that would make a reasonable person ask how 2 mid-level professionals could suddenly afford a private life and risk. He learned how to be patient. A cheap prepaid phone in the glove box gave him what no observation could. Conversations recorded as texts, plans mapped in uncaring language. Their messages were intimate in ways that made his stomach twist and practical in ways that made his blood run cold. "He still has no clue," one message read. "Once this is over, we'll be free." There was that word again. Free from what? From a life they'd been pretending to keep? From obligations? The messages hinted at plans beyond passion, moving money, lawyers, accounts. Someone sent him a threat in the night. An anonymous message. "Stop digging or you'll regret it." The message was thin and cowardly, but it confirmed something Reed had warned him. When criminals get rattled, they make mistakes. Aiden felt a dangerous satisfaction. He kept the message and showed it to Reed. "Let him rattle," Reed said. "They make mistakes when they're scared. But don't provoke them directly. Let us take them." Aiden tightened his trap. He recognized a public event as the perfect place to expose private crimes. Riley's parents' anniversary dinner would be crowded with family, witnesses who could see the absurdity of a man who spent family time colluding with employees. Joseph had wormed into family functions before, laughing, calling jokes, ingratiating himself with the way men do when they want to belong. Aiden saw him now as a man performing the role of family friend, the way actors rehearse lines they don't mean. At the anniversary dinner, Aiden performed the small kindnesses that disarmed suspicions. He complimented Riley's dress. He pretended to joke about the future with her parents. He took up conversation about the weather like a man who had no idea of the undercurrents of deception humming beneath the cloth napkins. But he slipped away into her father's study and photographed a checkbook he'd seen Riley finger nervously earlier in the night. The photos showed a pattern: check endorsements in someone else's name, someone else's signature, carefully forged. Back in the dining room, Joseph sat with that insufferable smirk. He thought he had already won. Aiden let him keep that smugness. It would look better on Joseph in a courtroom than Aiden's exposed anger ever would. A week later, Aiden found something that tightened the noose in a full twist. A second phone in Riley's car, a cheap prepaid burner she kept specifically for Joseph. The messages were explicit and practical, references to lawyers, to dates when funds would move, to his name, Aiden's, mentioned as if it were a resource, someone to be used and held in reserve. Aiden copied every screen, every timestamp. He put the phone back where he'd found it. At home, he continued the performance. He poured Riley wine, told her he admired how hard she worked, kissed her, smiled. Her relief looked almost like pity. She believed she had him tamed again. For Aiden, the work was more complicated. He was not just collecting evidence. He was shaping the environment in which that evidence would matter. Threats continued. An anonymous knock left the Joseph of someone testing boundaries. Aiden's life narrowed to the diameter of decisions. Exposed too early, and the legal defenses would flip him into the villain. Wait too long, and they might hide the evidence or destroy the threads tying them down. Reed needed more to build a case. Aiden needed witnesses. He decided he would produce both in a setting where both the law and the family could see the truth up close. He set that stage at Riley's family home with 200 small, impartial witnesses, relatives. He arranged his timing, rehearsed papers into a folder that would look like any other document at a dinner, and planned his speech. He would not be loud, he would be surgical. He would hand the truth to people whose shock would be a public instrument. The night of the dinner, he moved through the house like a man whose life had been stripped of pretense. He carried a folder in his briefcase, photos, copies of receipts, bank statements, screenshots of the burner phone conversations, and copies of the forged checks. He had not told Reed precisely when he would act. Reed had told him to be careful, to let procedure handle arrests, but Aiden had a combination in him now. The meticulousness of a planner and the hunger of someone who had been wronged. Guests ate, toasts were made. Joseph arrived late, with that smug confidence of someone who thinks a parking spot and a clean shirt can buy goodwill. Riley sat luminous in a way that made Aiden want to win this, in a way that would hurt her enough to be unforgettable. He kept his face a mask of ordinary calm. He let wine warm his tongue. He listened to his future in motion. Then, when the room felt comfortable and complacent, when laughter had smoothed the table into a lie of togetherness, Aiden rose. He said simply, "I'd like to make a toast." The murmurs quieted. He set his briefcase on the table and opened it. The folder he pulled out did not look like evidence to a casual eye. just papers. But he let it spill across the table. Photographs of the condo, copies of bank statements with withdrawals matched to the receipts he'd collected, screenshots from the burner phone and that anonymous threat, and finally a packet of forged checks with his name. The room's sound shifted. Silverware clinked. Riley's fork slipped from her fingers. Joseph's face drained color. Somewhere at the edges of the room, someone gasped. The family folded inward, the way waves pull seaweed. Aiden did not raise his voice. He felt then the particular power of calm outrage. He said, "These are the papers that explain a lot. These are the things my fiancée and her colleague have been hiding. Not just that they lied, that they stole, forged, and used my name to hide it." Time tightened like a fist. Joseph lunged toward the table, reaching for the folder. Before he could close the distance, the front door opened and Luke Reed walked in. Not alone, but with 2 plainclothes officers. Reed had been there long enough to watch faces go from smug to terrified. Joseph tried to push past the officers. He tried to make a run for it. The scene went from small domestic spat to the kind of arrest you'd seen in a movie. The shuffle of cuffs, a shouted vow of regret, someone being dragged out the door. Riley screamed, pleading, denying, fingers pressed to her lips, like someone trying to stave off a truth even her own skin couldn't hide. Aiden stood at his place with his folder on the table and the distant, strange feeling of having administered justice himself. He hadn't wanted to become judge and jury. He'd wanted proof to be seen by people who couldn't be bought with charm. The family watched Joseph hauled away, and their faces were full of disbelief and betrayal. When the door closed and the night bruised into a new kind of silence, Aiden walked out into the cool air and felt something like a beginning and an ending at once. He'd set the plan. Had he set a trap? Maybe. He'd done what he felt he had to do. Now he would have to let law take the rest. He would have to face the fallout that would follow an arrest. He didn't yet know how far the threads would reach. He didn't yet know if Riley would be charged. He didn't know what the bank would determine. What he knew was this: the night of headlights, the moment he boxed Joseph in with his car, had been the hinge. Whatever came after would pivot on what he'd chosen to do with the evidence he had found. He had made the house a theater and invited the people who mattered. He had let the private become public. Now he would watch to see what burned away and what would remain. The night of the dinner ended with sirens fading down the street and the heavy hush of a family trying to understand how their lives had just tilted. Aiden didn't stay to comfort anyone. He left the folder on the table, evidence in plain sight, and walked out into the cool air, feeling the weight of his choices settle in. The morning after, his phone buzzed at 6. Luke Reed. "They're holding Keller," Reed said. "Money laundering, embezzlement, wire fraud. We're still stacking charges. Your evidence ties in clean. You did well, Aiden." "And Riley?" Aiden asked. His voice cracked, barely. A pause. "She's not in cuffs yet, but the papers, the forged checks, your name showing up where it doesn't belong, she's a person of interest now." The phrase person of interest cut deeper than any insult. Aiden closed his eyes, leaning against the wall of his apartment, the silence of a half-empty life pressing in. By midday, news had reached the office. Whispers curled through cubicles. People avoided Aiden's eyes as if betrayal were contagious. He worked mechanically, but the weight of looks followed him. He was the man whose fiancée had lied, whose colleague had been arrested in a spectacle. That evening, Riley came home. She didn't knock. She still had her key. Her face was pale, her movements shaky, but her voice was sharpened by desperation. "You set him up," she hissed, dropping her bag onto the counter. Aiden didn't rise from the chair. "I didn't set him up. I exposed what was already there." "You ruined everything," she shouted. "Do you know what you've done? The house, the accounts, the—" She stopped, catching herself. Aiden tilted his head. "The what, Riley? The plan? The future you were building on my name?" Her lips trembled. For the first time, he saw not guilt, but calculation. Like she was running numbers in her head, estimating whether begging or threatening would get her further. "You think you're safe because you ran to Reed," she said finally. "But Keller wasn't stupid. He covered tracks. You were on some of those documents too. If this goes wrong, Aiden, they won't care who forged what. They'll come for you too." That night, after she stormed out, Aiden sat at the kitchen table with the burner phone in one hand and a cup of black coffee in the other. Reed's warning replayed in his head. "If they know you're feeding us, you're at risk." He flipped through the messages again, this time slower. There, 2 lines he'd skimmed before. "Transfer under his signature is ready. If it collapses, he's the fall guy." His stomach dropped. Riley and Joseph hadn't just betrayed him emotionally. They had been building a legal coffin with his name carved on the plaque. The following week blurred into strategy. Reed called him into the precinct, where files spread across a table painted a broader picture. Shell companies, fake invoices, a slow siphon of funds that had bled their firm dry for over a year. Riley's handwriting showed up too often to dismiss as ignorance. "She's not just complicit," Reed said grimly. "She's a partner." Aiden stared at the papers, at the loops and curves of Riley's signature. The same hand that had written love notes and grocery lists had also signed him into ruin. His chest tightened with something worse than rage, grief maybe. But grief hardened into resolve. When the subpoena arrived, summoning Riley to testify, she came to Aiden first. She stood in his doorway like a stranger, voice trembling in rehearsed lines. "They're trying to pin this on me, but you know me, Nate. You know I'd never." "I knew you," he interrupted, past tense. Tears welled, but there was no softness in her eyes, just fear. The day of her testimony, Aiden sat in the back of the courtroom, silent, anonymous among the spectators. Joseph sat cuffed at the defense table, jaw tight, smirk gone. Riley took the stand, swearing to tell the truth, but her voice cracked under cross-examination. Emails, receipts, the burner phone, all dragged into the light. At one point, the prosecutor held up a photo Aiden had taken. Riley, pen in hand, signing documents beside Joseph. The timestamp glowed at the bottom of the screen. Riley froze. Her eyes flicked to the gallery, found Aiden, and widened. It was the first time she seemed to realize the depth of his betrayal of her betrayal. Joseph erupted, shouting, cursing, the bailiff wrestling him back down. The judge's gavel cracked the air like thunder. By the end of the week, indictments stacked higher. Joseph faced years in federal prison. Riley's charges ranged from fraud to conspiracy. The life they'd built in secret had collapsed into dust and handcuffs. For Aiden, there was no celebration, only a strange emptiness. Justice had been served, but love had been poisoned beyond recovery. One evening, Reed met him again in the same diner, sliding a black folder across the table. "The case will drag out, but you're clear. You'll testify as a witness, not a suspect. They can't touch you." Aiden nodded slowly, the weight in his chest loosening for the first time in months. When he walked out into the night air, he didn't feel victorious. He felt free. But freedom comes with scars. He knew the whispers would follow him for years, that trust would taste bitter in his mouth, that somewhere in the city, Riley sat in a cell replaying every moment that had led her there. And Aiden? He walked forward, alone but unshackled, finally certain of one thing. Betrayal may wound, but truth, once unleashed, can destroy. Months passed. The trial of State versus Keller and Morales had become a headline that wouldn't die. Newspapers called it the office affair scandal. TV anchors spoke of embezzlement and betrayal. And Aiden's name surfaced in whispers, always at the edges, never in print. He was the man almost framed, the man who'd pulled the thread that unraveled 2 lives. Joseph sat in a federal prison now, a number instead of a name. Riley had taken a plea bargain, less time than Joseph, but enough years to Joseph her youth with bars and cement. Aiden didn't attend the final sentencing. He didn't need to. The world had moved on. Aiden hadn't. He rented a small apartment across town, bare walls and second-hand furniture. At night, he'd sit with coffee gone cold, staring at the city lights. Freedom was supposed to feel like relief, but for him, it felt like drifting, like a ship cut loose from its anchor. One evening, Reed found him there. The Luke leaned against the doorway, eyes tired but kind. "You did good," Reed said. "Don't let it eat you alive." Aiden gave a thin smile. "Feels like all I did was burn everything down." "Sometimes you have to," Reed said simply. "Sometimes truth doesn't leave anything standing." In the weeks that followed, Aiden tried to rebuild. He worked longer hours, not for overtime, but to fill the empty spaces. Co-workers approached him cautiously, as if betrayal had made him fragile. Some nights he'd walk past the condo building, where he'd once watched Riley and Joseph slip inside. The gate still stood broken, the lights still flickered. But the windows were dark now. Ghosts of choices lingered there, but no life. And yet, life had a way of intruding. A colleague, Sarah, began stopping by his desk more often. Small things at first, an extra coffee, a question about a project, laughter that didn't feel forced. Aiden resisted at first, his chest tightening with old suspicion. But her kindness chipped at the walls he'd built. One night, after a long shift, Sarah offered him a ride. In the quiet of her car, she glanced at him and said, "Not everyone wants to use you, Aiden. Some of us just want to know you." Her words lingered long after she dropped him off. Still, ghosts weren't easily silenced. Aiden kept a box in his closet, copies of receipts, photos, the burner phone, relics of betrayal. He told himself he kept them as insurance, but deep down he knew part of him wasn't ready to let go. Part of him still carried the taste of vengeance, the fear that trust was just another trap. The final letter came on a rainy Thursday. From Riley, handwritten, smuggled through prison mail. "Aiden," it began, "I know I don't deserve your eyes on these words, but I need to say it. I loved you, I ruined you. Both are true. I chose wrong, and now I pay for it every day. Maybe someday you'll understand that I wasn't just betraying you, I was betraying myself. If you can hate me fully. Don't stay in between." Aiden read it twice, then burned it over the kitchen sink. He watched the paper curl to ash, and with it, something inside him loosened. By the time spring came, Sarah was in his life more steadily. Dinner turned into late-night talks, late-night talks into something like trust. Aiden didn't call it love, not yet. Love was a word he treated like glass now, fragile, dangerous. But he called it living again, and that was enough. One night, walking her to her car, Sarah slipped her hand into his. He didn't flinch. He let it stay. Betrayal had scarred him, yes, but scars are proof of survival, not just pain. And as the city lights stretched out before him, Aiden finally understood. Revenge had ended in handcuffs, but healing began quietly, in the simple act of choosing to walk forward. 3 years later, Aiden's life looked almost ordinary. The apartment had given way to a modest townhouse, with warm walls and shelves of books that weren't just for filling space. Sarah lived there now too, her laughter echoing in the kitchen, her steady hand leaving notes on the counter. They weren't married yet, but they didn't need labels. Aiden had learned that trust, once shattered, grew back slowly, like a tree after lightning. Stronger in some places, weaker in others, but alive. He'd stopped counting anniversaries of the night it all collapsed. He no longer drove past the old condo, no longer kept the box of evidence. One evening he carried it to a landfill and left it there, watching it swallowed by dirt and machines. It felt like burying a ghost, yet ghosts have their own way of clawing back. The letter arrived in early spring. No return address, just his name written in a familiar hand. He knew before he opened it who it was from. "I get out soon," it read. "Not to come back to you, don't worry, but freedom means choices. And I wanted you to know that I'll be making mine. You destroyed what I built, Aiden. Maybe you were right. Maybe you saved yourself. But some debts don't stay buried. No threats, no apologies. Just a reminder that the past still breathed." Aiden folded the letter once, slid it into the bottom drawer of his desk, and locked it. For the first time in years, sleep didn't come easy. He lay awake, Sarah breathing softly beside him, and stared at the ceiling. The next morning, Reed called. His voice carried that old edge. "She's out in 6 months," Reed said. "Figured you should know. We'll keep an eye. But you keep living." Aiden nodded, though Reed couldn't see it. Later that evening, he walked with Sarah through the park, cherry blossoms drifting like pale confetti. She laughed at something small, squeezed his hand, and he realized life wasn't measured by the shadows chasing you, but by the people walking beside you. Still, as he looked out across the fading light, he understood something. Betrayal leaves scars, scars leave stories, and some stories never end neatly. And somewhere, out there, Riley was free again. But so was he. 6 months later, the city felt different, brighter, louder, almost careless in its rush forward. Aiden had almost convinced himself that Riley's letter was just noise, an empty ripple from the past, until the night she appeared. It was late, rain washing the streets silver. Aiden had stayed late at work, Sarah away on a business trip. As he unlocked his front door, a voice drifted from the shadows. "Still working late nights, Aiden?" He froze. Slowly, he turned. Riley stood there, older, thinner, eyes sharper than he remembered. Prison had stripped her of glamour, but not of presence. She wore no smile, just that unreadable expression he once mistook for love. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low. She tilted her head. "Funny, that's what I thought when you showed up at my condo that night." The silence stretched. Rain pattered between them. "I'm not here to beg," she continued, "and I'm not here to apologize. I just wanted to see the man who burned it all down. My career, Joseph's life, mine." You burned it yourself, Aiden said. Her eyes flickered. Maybe, but you lit the match. Aiden felt the old anger rise, then fade just as quickly. He was tired of carrying it. What do you want, Riley? She stepped closer, her voice softer now, almost fragile. Closure. To know if you still hate me. To know if, she paused, if there was ever a part of you that still remembers me the way I remember you. Aiden's chest tightened, but not from longing, only from the echo of who he used to be. I remember, he said. I remember enough to never go back. For the first time, her mask cracked. Not tears, just a flicker of defeat. She nodded slowly, as if she'd expected the answer all along. Then that's it, she whispered. That's all I came for. She turned, footsteps fading into the rain. Aiden didn't stop her. He didn't follow. He simply stood in the doorway of the life he'd rebuilt. And for the first time, he felt the past leave with her. Later that night, Sarah called, her voice warm across the distance. He listened, smiled, and realized something. The war was over. Not because Riley surrendered, but because he no longer fought. Betrayal had ended in fire, revenge in ashes. But forgiveness, true forgiveness, wasn't for Riley. It was for himself. And at last, Aiden was free. 10 years later. Aiden sat on a wooden bench in a quiet park, the air heavy with summer heat. Children's laughter echoed from the playground nearby, his daughters among them. She had Sarah's smile, Sarah's eyes, and a way of running that made him forget, for a moment, that the past had ever existed. Life had unfolded in steady steps. Marriage, a home filled with warmth, small rituals of peace. The scars were still there, silent, invisible, but no longer burning. Sometimes, though, when the world grew too quiet, he still thought of Riley. He had read once in the news that Joseph had died in prison. Violence, a debt unpaid. Riley's name appeared briefly years later in a small article. Released, living out of state, working quietly under a different name. After that, nothing. Like a ghost swallowed by time. Aiden never searched further. Some doors were meant to stay closed. "Daddy!" His daughter's voice pulled him back. She bounded up, clutching a half-crushed flower. "For you!" He took it, smiled, and felt something deep inside settle, like a final stone placed in the foundation of a rebuilt life. As Sarah waved from a distance, Aiden realized his story hadn't been one of betrayal, not really. It had been one of survival, of learning that love can return, not as fire and obsession, but as something steadier, quieter, like roots sinking deep into the ground. He looked at the flower in his hand, at his daughter's bright eyes, and whispered to himself, "It's over." And this time he knew it was true, and that was Aiden's story. A story of love turned to betrayal, trust burned into ashes, and a man who learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the ghosts of our past return, but we don't have to let them haunt us forever. Betrayal cuts deep, but scars remind us that healing is possible. That freedom, no matter how late it comes, is worth fighting for. Thank you so much for watching Scars and Stories. If this story spoke to you, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. I'm Emily, and I'll be back soon with another tale of heartbreak, resilience, and the scars that make us who we are. Until then, take care and remember, every scar has a story,